Keanu and Zendaya were driving down the beautiful coastal highway in Keanu's red Ferrari. The drive was peaceful, far from the usual chaos of the city, and the sound of the car's engine hummed steadily along the road. Keanu kept one hand on the wheel, driving smoothly as Zendaya sat beside him. They were on their way to a charity gala, but for now, it was just the two of them, enjoying a rare moment of calm. Zendaya smiled as she looked out the window. "I gotta admit, Keanu, this is a nice drive," she said. "Not exactly what I expected from Hollywood." Keanu chuckled, keeping his eyes on the road. "Yeah, it's not the usual rush hour, huh?" He glanced at her. "You remember that one time in the movie where I had to drive while everything was blowing up?" Zendaya laughed. "How could I forget? You were the hero. But now, look at you, calm and collected, just cruising down the coast." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're still that great behind the wheel?" Keanu smirked. "You'll be the judge of that, won't you?" As they laughed and joked, the evening sky filled with orange and pink hues. For a brief moment, everything felt easy. It was just two friends enjoying the road, unaware that things were about to take a sudden turn. As Keanu drove down the highway, the low fuel warning light flickered on. He glanced at the dashboard and frowned. "Looks like we need to stop," he said, guiding the red Ferrari towards the small gas station ahead. The gas station was old and quiet, with only a few pumps and a small convenience store. The neon sign above the store flickered faintly in the dim light. Keanu slowly pulled up to one of the pumps and turned off the engine. Zendaya stretched in her seat and opened the door. "I'll grab a coffee while you fill up," she said, stepping out of the car. Keanu nodded, reaching for the fuel cap. He got out of the car, closed the door behind him, and walked around to the gas tank. He twisted the nozzle and began to fill the tank, keeping an eye on the surroundings. Zendaya, meanwhile, walked into the convenience store. The doorbell jingled as she entered, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. She made her way to the coffee station, scanning the selection. Keanu kept filling up the car, his focus still on the task at hand, unaware that a quiet moment was about to turn into something unexpected. As Zendaya walked towards the convenience store, two bikers leaned against their motorcycles, their eyes locking onto her immediately. The first biker, a large man with a thick beard and tattoos covering his arms, let out a low whistle as he watched her. Well, look at this," he muttered, nudging his friend beside him. The second biker, a leaner man with a crooked grin and a gold tooth, stared at Zendaya, clearly interested. "Hollywood, huh? Don't see that every day," he said, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and excitement. Zendaya tried to ignore them, walking calmly into the store. She was used to being noticed, but she didn't expect the attention to turn uncomfortable. The two bikers exchanged a look, then made their move. They pushed off from their motorcycles and started walking toward the door of the store, blocking her path as she entered. Inside the store, Zendaya made her way to the coffee station, trying to stay calm. She grabbed a coffee cup and headed toward the counter. But as she reached the aisle, she noticed the two bikers entering behind her, their steps deliberate and too close for comfort. The larger biker, still grinning, leaned in casually. "What brings a lady like you to a place like this?" he asked, his tone dripping with mock politeness. The second biker stood off to the side, eyes locked on her, refusing to give her any space. He crossed his arms, blocking the exit without saying a word. Zendaya's heart began to race as she realized the situation was escalating. The store was quiet, and she felt the walls closing in. She tried to stay calm, maintaining control of her body language. "Just grabbing a coffee while my friend is outside," she replied, forcing a polite smile. But she could tell they weren't going to let her leave easily. The tension in the air thickened as they continued to circle her. Keanu was standing outside, finishing up with the Ferrari's fuel tank. As he twisted the nozzle back into place, his eyes shifted towards the convenience store. His gaze locked on the two bikers who had been hanging around outside, now heading toward the entrance. Keanu didn't move right away. His instincts kicked in. There was something off about the way the bikers were looking at Zendaya. He had seen enough situations like this to know when trouble was brewing. The bikers didn't seem like regular travelers stopping for gas, they had a certain aggressive energy about them. Keanu's hands clenched slightly as he watched the bikers enter the store, one after the other. His eyes never left the door. He wasn't worried yet, but he wasn't taking any chances either. He knew Zendaya could handle herself, but he also knew how quickly things could escalate. Keanu took a few steps towards the store, keeping a safe distance, his eyes scanning the situation. The bikers had blocked Zendaya's path, and he could see her body language shift. She wasn't panicking, but she was alert. Keanu's jaw tightened. He could sense the tension rising inside the small store. The larger biker was leaning in a little too close to Zendaya, and the other one, with the gold tooth, was standing back but watching her every move. Keanu could tell she was trying to remain calm, but he also saw that she was clearly aware of the danger. The way the bikers were positioning themselves, making comments and blocking exits, was a clear sign they weren't just making small talk. Keanu's eyes narrowed, his muscles tense, but he didn't rush in. Sometimes, it was best to wait and see how things played out. If they pushed Zendaya too far, Keanu would act. But for now, he was ready to move at a moment's notice. He watched every little shift in the bikers' posture, analyzing their every move. He knew they were testing her patience, and he could already tell it wasn't going to end well if they didn't back off. Keanu stayed outside, waiting for the right moment, his focus entirely on the store. Every second felt like an eternity. Inside the convenience store, Zendaya continued to keep her calm, but the situation was getting worse. The two bikers were now standing too close to her, blocking her path to the door. The bigger biker with the thick beard leaned in a little, his breath heavy as he looked her up and down. "Hollywood, huh? Bet you don't get many people like us, do you?" he said, his voice low and taunting. Zendaya gave a small, polite smile, trying to remain calm. "I've met all kinds of people," she replied, keeping her voice steady. She didn't want to provoke them, but she also wasn't going to let them intimidate her. The biker with the gold tooth chuckled darkly. "Bet you don't want to hang around here too long, huh?" he said, stepping closer. He reached out a hand, casually brushing against her arm. "Maybe we could show you a better time." Zendaya immediately tensed. She stepped back slightly, maintaining a firm grip on her coffee cup. "I'm fine, thanks," she said, her voice still calm but more firm now. "I'm just trying to leave." But the bikers weren't done. The bigger man stepped forward, crossing his arms in front of the door, blocking her escape. "No need to rush, darling," he said, his grin growing wider. "You're in no hurry, are you?" Zendaya's heart started to race, but she didn't show it. She glanced toward the door, then back at the bikers. "I really need to go," she repeated, her tone now more serious. She tried to step around the larger biker, but he moved in front of her, blocking her once more. The situation was becoming more tense. Zendaya tried again to step sideways, but the gold-toothed biker reached out and grabbed her arm roughly. "I don't think you're going anywhere," he said with a nasty grin. Zendaya froze. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her composure, refusing to panic. She didn't fight back yet, but she knew she had to act fast. The grip on her arm tightened, and she could feel the situation quickly spiraling out of control. Just as things were about to get worse, the door swung open, and Keanu stepped inside, his presence changing the atmosphere instantly. The moment the door of the convenience store swung open, Keanu stepped inside. His movements were calm, controlled, but his presence was undeniable. He didn't rush in or make any sudden moves, He simply walked through the door with a quiet confidence that made the atmosphere inside the store shift instantly. The two bikers, still focused on Zendaya, froze the moment they saw him. The bigger biker stopped talking, and the one with the gold tooth glanced over at Keanu, his eyes narrowing as he took in the tall figure now standing just inside the door. The tension in the store became thicker, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Keanu didn't say a word at first. He simply stood there, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze briefly met Zendaya's, and without her saying anything, he knew exactly what had been happening. Then, his attention shifted back to the two bikers, who were now looking at him, sizing him up. The bigger biker cleared his throat, his bravado faltering just a little. "What's your problem, man?" he muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. But even he couldn't hide the shift in his demeanor. There was something about Keanu's quiet presence that made him uneasy. Keanu took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the bikers. "You're going to apologize to her," he said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the bikers hesitate. The bikers exchanged a quick, nervous glance. The gold-toothed one opened his mouth to say something, but Keanu's gaze remained firm, unwavering. "Now," Keanu repeated, his tone not a request but a command. The bigger biker shifted uncomfortably, but Keanu didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, watching, letting the silence grow heavier with every passing second. The bikers knew that something had changed. They weren't in control anymore. Finally, the gold-toothed biker exhaled sharply and turned toward Zendaya. "Sorry," he muttered, barely looking at her. "We didn't mean to cause trouble." The bigger biker grunted, clearly frustrated, but he too muttered an apology. "Yeah, sorry." Keanu didn't react to their apologies. He simply nodded once, acknowledging that they had done what he asked. He didn't need to say more. His presence had already spoken for itself. The bikers, visibly humiliated, walked out of the store, leaving Zendaya and Keanu in peace. The two bikers, clearly humiliated by Keanu's intervention, reluctantly turned and walked toward the door. The bigger biker, still clenching his fists, shot one last glare at Keanu. He didn't say anything, but his expression was enough to show that he wasn't happy with how things had turned out. The gold-toothed biker, trying to keep his pride, muttered under his breath as they walked out. As they passed through the door, the bigger biker turned his head slightly, just enough to make sure Keanu was still watching. "This ain't over," he muttered, his voice low but filled with a warning. Keanu didn't flinch. He simply watched them walk away, his eyes sharp, taking in every movement. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The sound of the bikers' footsteps faded as they stepped outside, leaving the store in an uneasy silence. Keanu stood still for a moment, his gaze still on the door, waiting to see if anything else would happen. The bigger biker's words echoed in his mind. "This ain't over." He didn't know exactly what it meant, but Keanu trusted his instincts, and something told him that this wasn't the end. Zendaya, however, seemed more relaxed now that the bikers were gone. She took a deep breath and let out a small laugh. "Well, that was intense. Glad it's over." She walked toward the counter, her confidence slowly returning. Keanu watched her for a moment, then turned to face her. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Zendaya smiled reassuringly. "I'm fine, Keanu. They're gone, and I'm safe. No need to worry." Keanu gave her a small nod, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The bikers had left, but their cryptic words stuck with him. He knew that people like that didn't let things go so easily. He glanced out the store window, scanning the parking lot. Everything seemed quiet, but his instincts told him to stay alert. Zendaya, oblivious to his thoughts, grabbed her coffee and headed toward the door. "Let's get going," she said with a smile. Keanu followed her, but his mind stayed sharp, the feeling that something wasn't quite finished lingering in the back of his mind. As Keanu and Zendaya walked out of the store, Keanu's eyes immediately went to the parking lot. Everything looked calm, but something caught his attention. Lying next to the Ferrari was a black motorcycle helmet, left carelessly on the ground. It hadn't been there before. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he stopped in his tracks. He knew that helmets didn't just get dropped by accident. He walked over to the helmet, crouching down for a closer look. There was nothing inside, no note, no message. Yet, Keanu's gut told him this wasn't a random mistake. The bikers hadn't just left it behind by accident. It was a message, or maybe a warning. He picked it up for a moment, inspecting it closely, but his mind was already working through the possibilities. Keanu stood up, the helmet still in his hand, and looked around the gas station once more. The bikers were gone, but the feeling of unease remained. He didn't want to overthink things, but the fact that they had left something behind was a clear sign that they weren't done with this yet. The helmet was just a symbol of something more, something that might come back to haunt them later. He turned to Zendaya, who was already halfway to the car. "We need to go," he said, his voice low but firm. Zendaya glanced at him, sensing the change in his tone. She didn't ask any questions, but she could tell something was off. Keanu walked quickly to the driver's side and tossed the helmet into the back seat of the Ferrari. He didn't need it, but he knew he wasn't leaving it behind. He slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As the car roared to life, Keanu's eyes stayed focused on the rearview mirror. He had the unsettling feeling they were being watched, that the bikers might be following them or waiting for the right moment to strike again. Zendaya glanced over at him. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Keanu didn't look at her. His grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "Just stay alert," he said. "Something's not right." As they pulled out of the gas station, Keanu kept checking the mirror, feeling the weight of the helmet's presence behind them. It was far from over, and Keanu knew it. Keanu's focus never left the road as the Ferrari sped down the highway, the sun starting to dip lower in the sky. Zendaya sat quietly beside him, but there was an uneasy feeling in the air. Keanu kept glancing at the rearview mirror, noticing the two motorcycles still behind them. They weren't speeding up to pass, but they weren't falling behind either. The bikers were keeping a steady pace, matching the Ferrari's speed exactly. Keanu's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. He knew that something wasn't right. His mind raced, running through possibilities. If they were just out for a ride, they would have passed them by already. But instead, the bikers were tailing them, staying just far enough behind to remain unnoticed by other drivers, but close enough that Keanu could clearly see them in the mirror. Zendaya glanced at him, sensing the change in the air. "Keanu, are they following us?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with a hint of concern. Keanu didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was calculating the situation. The bikers had left the gas station right after the confrontation, and now they were here, keeping pace. It wasn't a coincidence. He knew they had to be up to something, and Keanu wasn't about to let them get any closer. His mind worked quickly, analyzing the bikers' movements. He saw how they were positioned, staying far enough back to avoid drawing attention, but never falling behind. They were trying to be subtle, waiting for the right moment to make a move. Keanu wasn't going to give them that chance. Keanu adjusted the speed slightly, trying to get a better feel for their intentions. He kept the Ferrari moving at a steady pace, not speeding up or slowing down. He wanted to see what they would do next. If the bikers sped up, he would know they were planning something. If they kept pace, he'd have to figure out the best way to handle it. Zendaya watched him carefully. She knew Keanu was the calm type, but even she could see the tension in his movements. She didn't say anything, trusting him to handle the situation. They'd been through enough together to know that when Keanu got this focused, things were serious. As they passed another sign for an exit ramp, Keanu checked the mirror again. The bikers were still there, following closely. Keanu's mind was calculating again. He knew they were getting closer to a more isolated part of the road, a place where they could be easily cornered. He couldn't let that happen. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the road for options. He wasn't going to let these bikers dictate the pace of the situation. He had a plan, but he needed to be sure the bikers would make the first move before he acted. Zendaya could feel the tension growing, but she kept quiet, knowing that Keanu was doing what he needed to do. They were being followed, and she knew that sooner or later, something was going to break. She only hoped they were ready for whatever was coming. Keanu knew that the situation was reaching a critical point. The bikers were still following them closely, not giving up, and the road ahead was narrowing. There was a sharp bend up ahead, and Keanu knew it was the perfect opportunity to make his move. He glanced at Zendaya quickly, his expression serious. "Hold on," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Without hesitation, Keanu took a quick, sharp turn onto a side road that veered off the main highway. It was a narrow, winding path that few vehicles would dare to follow. The bikers, too focused on their chase, immediately tried to follow, but the tight curves of the road put them at a disadvantage. Keanu expertly maneuvered the Ferrari, guiding it smoothly through each twist and turn, making sure to keep his speed steady without losing control. Zendaya held on tightly as the car swerved around the tight corners. She could hear the roar of the motorcycles behind them, but Keanu's confidence was clear. He knew exactly what he was doing. The road was getting even narrower, with bumps and sharp turns that would be difficult for the bikers to handle at high speeds. Keanu used the terrain to his advantage, pushing the Ferrari to its limits but keeping it under perfect control. The bikers, on the other hand, struggled to keep up. The narrow road made it hard for them to maneuver, and the bigger biker, riding the heavier bike, was losing ground. The smaller biker tried to push ahead, but his movements were less smooth, and he was fighting to stay in control. As Keanu took another sharp turn, he glanced at the rearview mirror and saw the bikers getting closer. They were trying to make a move to catch up, but Keanu was ready. He pressed the gas pedal harder, pushing the Ferrari forward with all its power. The tires gripped the road, and the car shot ahead, taking another sharp corner. The bikers were too slow to follow, and as they tried to catch up, they were thrown off balance. The bigger biker swerved too wide, his bike skidding slightly as he fought to regain control. The smaller biker, also struggling, lost his rhythm as the road twisted again. Keanu, in a smooth and calculated move, used the curve to his advantage, forcing the bikers into a position where they couldn't keep up. Within moments, the Ferrari had gained enough distance. The bikers were no longer a threat. Keanu had shaken them off, using his driving skills to outsmart them. As they disappeared from view, Keanu finally allowed himself to relax, though his focus remained sharp. Zendaya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was insane," she said, a mix of relief and awe in her voice. Keanu gave her a brief smile but kept his eyes on the road, still cautious. "Just getting started," he said, knowing that even though they were safe for now, the bikers weren't finished yet. After a few more minutes of intense driving, Keanu glanced in the rearview mirror. The bikers were finally falling behind, their motorcycles no longer able to keep up with the Ferrari's speed. Keanu allowed himself to relax a little, but he kept his focus on the road. He knew they weren't completely out of danger yet. Zendaya, sitting beside him, took a deep breath and leaned back in her seat. "I think we lost them," she said, her voice filled with relief. The tension that had been building up since the gas station seemed to fade, but Keanu remained calm and alert, his grip on the steering wheel steady. The road ahead stretched out toward the Charity Gala venue, a large hotel filled with lights and excitement. The flashing lights from the paparazzi and the gathering crowd signaled that they had arrived. Keanu took the final turn and drove smoothly into the hotel's parking area. The sound of the Ferrari's engine rumbled softly as he brought the car to a stop. Keanu turned off the engine but didn't immediately move. His eyes scanned the area, checking for anything unusual. Zendaya looked over at him, noticing his cautious demeanor. "Keanu, we made it," she said, smiling. "We're safe now." Keanu nodded, but his mind was still on the bikers. "For now," he replied quietly. He knew better than to assume the threat was completely over. There was always the chance they could come back or try something else. Keanu wasn't about to let his guard down just yet. Zendaya could sense his unease, but she didn't press him. She reached for the door handle, ready to leave the car. "Well, I'm just glad we made it here without any more trouble," she said, trying to lighten the mood. Keanu opened his door and stepped out, still scanning the area around them. He walked around the car to open the door for Zendaya, his eyes quickly darting to the parking lot and the people gathered outside. It was calm for now, but Keanu's instincts told him to stay alert. Zendaya stepped out of the car, her confidence restored but still a little shaken by the events. Keanu locked the car, his gaze still focused on the surroundings. He didn't want to show it, but he knew they weren't completely out of danger. The bikers were still out there, and Keanu wasn't ready to assume this was the end.